Before we begin, a word of caution. The story you are about to hear is drawn from the deep, shadowed corners of American folklore. It is a tale of reckless curiosity and the unforgiving nature of the primal woods. Viewer discretion is advised, especially for those who feel the cold touch of the unseen world. The air in Cascade County, Washington, always smelled the same. Rich, wet earth and the sharp, clean scent of cedar. It was a smell that promised both endless life and endless, quiet decay. Here, the great Olympic National Forest was not just a collection of trees. It was a cathedral of shadow, mist, and time, older than the Republic itself. It was into this vast, indifferent wilderness that three teenagers, Leo, Maya, and Sam, drove their rattling, mud-splattered Jeep, their faces bright with the kind of arrogant confidence only youth can grant. They were chasing a legend, the kind that local loggers and tribal elders warned against with the same solemnity. The Phantom Logging Camp, abandoned since the Great Depression, rumored to be haunted by more than just dust and broken dreams. Leo, the self-proclaimed leader and a budding documentary filmmaker, leaned forward, his eyes alight with excitement that bordered on disrespect. He held up a shaky cell phone, already recording. "All right, Scaryfolktalesusa viewers," he narrated into the camera, his voice too loud for the surrounding silence. "We are officially crossing the boundary. Past this overgrown sign, the maps go blank, the GPS gives up, and the legends start to breathe. They say the fog out here eats people whole. They say it protects what's left of the old ways." Maya, quieter and infinitely more cautious, sat beside him, watching the towering Douglas firs close ranks behind them. Her anxiety was a low thrum beneath Leo's bravado. She had brought 3 compasses and a detailed print map, things Leo scoffed at. "Leo, this is where that elderly couple vanished in '98, she reminded him, her voice barely a whisper. "We agreed. Find the perimeter, document, and get out by sundown. We are not spending the night." In the back, Sam, the resident skeptic and the strongest of the group, was busy setting up his amateur radio equipment, hoping to catch some kind of distant signal. He was the anchor, the one who tried to ground Leo's flights of fancy. "We're here for the abandoned camp, Maya," Sam corrected, adjusting the antenna. "It's a historical site. Whatever vanished in '98 was probably a bad hiker and worse planning. Stick to the facts, Leo. No eerie mist monsters for your clickbait opening." Leo simply grinned, his focus entirely on the promise of viral fame. He pulled the Jeep off the narrow, deeply rutted logging road and onto a scarcely visible side path, marked only by a pile of strange, moss-covered stones that felt deliberately placed. The air temperature immediately dropped by several degrees, and the already damp forest floor turned slick with a sudden, unnatural humidity. They hiked for 2 hours, the dense canopy swallowing the sunlight until it felt like perpetual twilight. The descriptions of the logging camp they'd found in a forgotten county archive suggested they should have been there already. It was during this endless trek that the forest began to communicate its displeasure. First, the sounds stopped, not gradually, but abruptly, as if a maestro had dropped his baton. The normal, ceaseless symphony of the temperate rainforest, the chatter of jays, the drumming of woodpeckers, the constant background rustle of 1,000 tiny lives, vanished. The silence was not peaceful. It was a roaring vacuum, a heavy cotton blanket pressed over their ears. They could hear the blood pumping in their own heads. Did the birds just stop?" Maya asked, hugging her arms around herself, despite her thick wool sweater. Leo scoffed, trying to maintain his adventurous demeanor. "Pressure change. It happens in these deep valleys. Keep moving." But even Leo was looking around, his grip tight on his camera tripod. He realized he hadn't seen a single squirrel, a deer track, or even a fly for 30 minutes. The woods were sterile. Sam, who had been leading the way with a machete to clear the encroaching salmonberry brambles, suddenly stopped dead. He raised his hand, signaling absolute quiet. He wasn't looking at the path. He was staring up at the massive, rain-blackened trunk of an ancient western red cedar. "What is it, Sam?" Leo whispered, finally realizing this was no ordinary hike. Sam pointed to a spot on the trunk, high above their heads. There, carved deep into the resilient wood, were a series of symbols. They weren't graffiti. They were old, the edges worn smooth by 100 years of rain and wind. The symbols depicted human figures running away from a central, ambiguous shape that looked like smoke or flowing water. Below this central image, a line was carved, with 5 distinct circles etched deeply into the wood. The circles were scored out, scratched over with such violence that they looked like wounds. "Native boundary markers," Sam stated, his voice low and serious. "Or maybe a warning. 5 circles. Maybe 5 lives lost? It's too specific to be random." Maya knelt and ran her hand over the base of the tree. "And it's old. These aren't just scratch marks. They look like they were made with a stone tool, or maybe a very sharp bone." A shiver traced her spine. She took a quick photo, convinced they had stumbled upon something sacred and recently violated. They decided, against the better judgment bubbling up in Maya's stomach, to press on for just a little longer. Leo argued that if the old camp was nearby, they had to be close to the source of the legend. Sam, intrigued by the glyphs, agreed that they needed context. 100 yards later, they found it. A barely visible trail that led through a dense thicket of fern and devil's club suddenly opened into a clearing. It was the ghost of a settlement. 3 or 4 dilapidated, gray cabins, their roofs collapsing under the weight of the encroaching forest. A rusted crane arm lay half-submerged in the boggy ground. The silence here was 10 times louder, heavier, and colder. The centerpiece of the clearing was a large, flat, slate-gray rock near the remnants of what might have been a mess hall. On the surface of this rock, they found the first definitive evidence of something that defied explanation. Sam knelt and examined a series of indentations in the soft, dark mud surrounding the slate. They were tracks, 3-toed, with a distinct, massive heel pad. He placed his large hiking boot next to one print. The print was nearly twice the length of his foot. "Bear?" Leo asked, his voice now devoid of excitement, replaced by a hollow uncertainty. "Not a bear," Sam mumbled, running his fingers along the edge of the print. "Bears have 5 toes, claws, and a different gait. These are almost human in structure but colossal, and the weight distribution is all wrong. And look at this." He pointed to a faint, smooth impression near the toe of the largest print. "It looks like something dragged here. Not a tail. Something flat and heavy." Maya didn't look at the tracks. She was staring at the mossy slate rock. Scrawled across the otherwise smooth surface, almost certainly in dried animal blood, was a fresh, deep scratch mark. It was not a word or a symbol. It was a single horizontal line, drawn with agonizing slowness, perfectly parallel to the ground. And at the end of the line, a single, newly etched, unscored circle. The circle was still raw, the rock beneath it freshly exposed. Leo's camera, which had been recording their entire journey, suddenly emitted a high-pitched, metallic whine and died. The screen went black, refusing to power on. They were deep inside the forest, the light failing, the sounds gone, and an aggressive, enormous set of tracks leading right into their clearing. And now there was a new circle, a fresh warning, waiting for them on a cold, gray stone. They decided, in a panicked, silent agreement, that they absolutely could not stay here. They grabbed their bags, abandoning the idea of setting up camp, and scrambled back toward the entrance path. But when they reached the edge of the clearing, the forest had changed. The path they had taken was gone, completely obscured by a sudden, impenetrable wall of dense, silver-white fog that hadn't been there moments before. It was a fog that didn't rise from the ground. It seemed to fall from the air, thick and suffocating. They stood at the edge of the mist, staring into the impenetrable white, the massive, three-toed footprints seeming to materialize and disappear right at the fog line, as if the monster itself was waiting for them to step into its embrace. Curiosity is a powerful force, but when mixed with arrogance and disrespect for the unknown, it becomes a devastating vulnerability. The greatest dangers in the wild are often the boundaries we dismiss. The forest had not closed in around them. It had simply chosen to stop letting them out. The veil had dropped, and as the last sliver of natural light surrendered to the aggressive white fog, the young adventurers realized that their search for a monster had ended, and the monster's search for them had just begun. Welcome back to the shadows, where the line between history and horror blurs. The forest, a silent sentinel, holds secrets that whisper on the wind, secrets that can ensnare the unwary. Listen closely, for the next chapter of our chilling tale unfolds now. The fog was not a natural phenomenon. It didn't drift or swirl. It pulsed, a living, breathing entity that had descended upon the logging camp clearing with a malevolent purpose. It muffled all sound, transforming the once vibrant, even if silent, forest into a monochromatic nightmare. Leo, Maya, and Sam stood paralyzed at its edge, their breath misting violently in the sudden, sharp cold. The immense, three-toed tracks that had so unnerved them now seemed to fade in and out of existence at the fog line, as if the very ground was shifting its memory. "This isn't normal," Maya finally managed, her voice a thin, reedy whisper that sounded alien in the oppressive silence. She clutched her print map, its creases now sweat-damp. The weather forecast was clear for days. This fog, it's too fast, too dense. Her eyes darted from the shifting gray wall to the unsettling tracks, then back to the fresh, unscored circle on the slate rock, which now seemed to glow faintly in the dwindling light. Sam, usually the pragmatic one, felt a knot of cold dread tightening in his stomach. He tried to activate his GPS, then his satellite phone, but both devices remained stubbornly dead, their screens black and unresponsive. He cursed under his breath, his previous confidence evaporating like dew in a desert sun. EMP? Magnetic interference? Something is actively jamming us. He looked at Leo, whose camera was still lifeless. "Your camera too, right?" Leo nodded, pale and speechless. His bravado had been stripped away, leaving behind a stark, naked fear. Their escape route was gone. The faint trail they had followed into the clearing had been consumed by the insatiable fog, leaving no trace. Every tree looked identical, every shadow a potential lurking threat. The forest, which moments ago had felt merely indifferent, now felt actively hostile. It was a labyrinth designed by something ancient and cunning. "We need to find a landmark," Sam urged, trying to inject some authority into his trembling voice. "Something distinct, something we can use to navigate back to the Jeep. A stream, a ridge, anything." They ventured tentatively into the fog, their steps tentative, their vision reduced to a mere few feet. The air was heavy, tasting of wet earth and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid, like stale blood and damp stone. The trees around them, once familiar, took on grotesque, shifting forms, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. As they stumbled through the whiteout, a new, chilling sensation began to prickle their senses. It was a subtle, almost subliminal feeling, like being watched from every direction at once. The silence, previously absolute, was now punctuated by barely perceptible sounds. The rustle of leaves that wasn't quite wind, a faint, rhythmic thump-thump that seemed to come from directly behind them, yet vanished the moment they turned. "Did you hear that?" Maya whispered, spinning around. "Sounded like a heartbeat, a really big one." Leo, trying to regain some semblance of his former self, forced a shaky laugh. "Just your imagination, Maya. The fog's playing tricks on us." But his eyes, wide and darting, betrayed his words. He found himself constantly checking over his shoulder, convinced he saw something shift in the periphery, a vague, dark form that dissolved before he could properly focus on it. They found themselves back at the slate rock with the fresh circle, startling themselves with their own disorientation. The monster tracks were still there, clear as ever, but now they seemed to curve around the rock, leading deeper into the forest, rather than away from the clearing. It was as if the creature had circled back, hurting them. "We're going in circles," Sam concluded, slamming his fist against a tree trunk in frustration. "This fog, it's disorienting us on purpose." It was then that Leo noticed something tucked beneath a collapsed timber, half buried in the damp soil. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its pages swollen and warped by years of dampness, but remarkably intact. He carefully pulled it free, recognizing the distinctive old-fashioned script from his archival research. "This is it," he breathed, a flicker of his old documentary maker excitement returning, though tempered by fear. The logger's journal, the one from 1930. With trembling hands, he opened the journal. The ink was faded, but legible. The entries were sparse, detailing the mundane life of a logging camp. Until one date, marked in bold, angry strokes. October 27th, 1930. "The men are spooked. The fog rolled in thick and silent last night, thicker than any I've seen in these woods. Then the sounds started. Not animal sounds, not human. Something mimicking the men's voices, calling out names from the mist. Old Man Hemlock swears he saw it. A shape without shape, like a hole in the air, moving faster than anything should. 2 men gone today, just vanished. No tracks in the mud, just the unsettling feeling of being watched by something that breathes the very fog itself." Leo read the entry aloud, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. The words seemed to echo the very sensations they were experiencing. Mimicking voices, a shape without shape. He looked up, his eyes meeting Maya's and Sam's. The truth, stark and terrifying, was undeniable. They were experiencing the very history he had so eagerly sought. A subtle disagreement began to simmer between them. Maya, her voice strained, advocated for finding high ground, even if it meant climbing a tree to try and see above the fog, or at least get a sense of direction. "We're sitting ducks down here. We need to move quickly towards higher ground, even if it's just a few feet." Sam, however, argued that moving blindly in this fog was a death wish. "We'll get more lost, Maya. We need to hunker down, try to make a fire, wait for the fog to lift, and conserve energy. We're running on adrenaline now. That won't last." He gestured towards the colossal tracks. "And that thing out there, it clearly wants us to move. Maybe it's hunting us by sound." Leo, still clinging to the journal, felt a strange pull. The logger's desperation was palpable in the old pages. What if it's not waiting for the fog to lift? What if it brings the fog? He pointed to a later, scrawled entry from the journal. "The fog is its breath, its hunger. It feeds on fear and confusion. It feeds on the lost." As they argued, a new sound cut through the oppressive silence, subtle at first, then growing clearer. It was a faint, almost melodic tapping, coming from the dense, white curtain of mist about 20 feet away. Tap, 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 tap. It was rhythmic, deliberate. "What is that?" Maya whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Sam gripped his machete, trying to see into the white. "It sounds like someone knocking, like on a door." The tapping continued, moving slowly, deliberately, closer to them. Stopped about 10 feet away. And then, a new sound emerged from the mist, a sound that froze them to their core. It was Maya's mother's voice. Perfect. Unmistakable. "Maya? Sweetie, are you there? It's time to come home. The fog is thick, but I'm here. Just follow my voice." Maya gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "Mom?" she cried, taking an involuntary step forward. "Mom, is that you?" "No!" Sam roared, grabbing her arm with surprising force. "Maya, don't. That's not your mom. How could she be out here?" Her voice? It's too clear, too close. His eyes were wild, remembering the journal entry. Something mimicking the men's voices. Leo, his face a mask of terror, pointed a shaking finger into the mist. "It's the shifter," he choked out, remembering the faint, hushed warnings he'd dismissed. The old stories, they call it the shifter of the mist. Copies voices, tries to lure you away, feeds on the lost. The voice in the fog called again, softer this time, more pleading. "Maya, honey, don't be scared. Just come to me. I'm right here. You're safe." Maya struggled against Sam's grip, her heart warring between the overwhelming terror and the primal urge to run to her mother's voice. "It sounds just like her, Sam. It is her." Sam held her tighter, pulling her back. "It wants you to believe that. It wants to separate us. We stay together." Suddenly, the voice shifted. It became deeper, rougher, filled with a desperate urgency. "Sam? Sam, help me. It's got me. It's got me, Sam." It was Leo's voice, distorted, filled with pain, coming from a different direction in the fog. Leo himself stood right beside Maya and Sam, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. He looked at Sam, then back at the shifting mist. This creature wasn't just imitating. It was using their deepest fears, their most profound loyalties, against them. It was a psychological predator. The air grew colder still. The thump-thump from behind them became more pronounced, closer. And from the direction of Maya's mother, the rhythmic tapping resumed, drawing closer, drawing them in. They were surrounded by deception, by an enemy that used their own hearts as a weapon. In the face of overwhelming fear and confusion, the greatest weapon against unseen dangers is honesty. Honesty with oneself about the terror, and unwavering trust in the companions who stand beside you. To deny fear or to doubt your allies is to give the unseen enemy the very tools it needs. The shifter of the mist was no mere beast. It was a puppeteer of the soul, playing on the strings of love and fear, trapped in a swirling labyrinth of deceit. With their own voices turned against them, our young adventurers faced a choice: succumb to the monster's song, or hold onto the fragile thread of their unity. But how do you fight something that can wear the face of your deepest comfort, and then the sound of your closest friend? The game had truly begun. Terror is not always a sudden attack. Sometimes, it is the slow, agonizing realization that your world is being dismantled piece by piece. Our travelers are now ensnared in a web of deceit, where voices lie and the very air is hostile. They seek guidance where the modern world fears to tread, deep in the territory of the old ways. Proceed with caution. The mimicry ceased as abruptly as it began, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than the calls. The three teens stood huddled together, breathing heavily in the biting cold, their eyes burning from staring into the impenetrable silver-white fog. Sam still gripped Maya's arm, confirming their shared reality. The voices of her mother and a panicked Leo were not real. They were an auditory mirage, woven by the unseen predator. Leo, stripped of all arrogance, looked desperately at the journal in his hand. "We have to leave the clearing," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It's hunting us here. We need to find help, or at least a place to shelter, somewhere that isn't its hunting ground." He recalled an obscure line from his initial research about the area, a forgotten footnote about a reclusive family who lived beyond the old logging borders. "There was an old cabin, right?" Leo asked Maya, remembering her initial detailed scouting. "Way off the old supply route. Someone named Elara. The local park ranger archives called her the keeper of the woods and warned people off her property. Said she was a descendant of the original tribe who lived here." Maya nodded slowly, pulling the sweat-damp map from her pocket. The old, faded ink traced a path barely visible, a sharp turn off the main forgotten trail, leading toward a small, isolated rise overlooking a fast-moving creek. "It's about a mile northwest, past the waterfall," she confirmed, trying to ignore the chill that came with the name Elara. The locals had spoken of her with a mixture of fear and profound respect, suggesting she carried secrets too heavy for the modern world. Sam, ever the pragmatist, was skeptical but saw no better option than moving. "A mile is better than standing here waiting for the fog to eat us. If this Elara is a local, she might know the ancient boundaries of this shifter. It's a risk, but staying is a guarantee." They started walking using Maya's map and compass. Miraculously, the compasses worked, though the needles twitched nervously, perhaps fighting the same magnetic interference that killed their electronics. They moved slowly, cautiously, using the edge of the clearing as a guide, staying just outside the thickest curtain of mist. Every crack of a twig underfoot sounded like a gunshot. As they moved toward the northwest, the oppressive silence finally broke, but not with a welcome sound. They began to hear a low, continuous groaning sound, deep in the forest, like the sound of ancient wood twisting under unbearable pressure. It wasn't loud, but it resonated deep in their chest cavities. "That's the forest itself," Maya observed, her eyes wide. "It sounds hurt." Leo pointed to the massive, moss-covered stumps that littered the ground, the silent casualties of the original logging operation. "The journal said the creature is tied to the land's pain," he whispered. "We're in the heart of the damage. Maybe the groaning is the creature or the reaction of the woods to its presence." They finally reached the creek, its water startlingly clear and cold. They splashed across the slippery stones, feeling a momentary sense of relief to have a clear landmark. Just beyond the creek, nestled in a small grove of very old, undisturbed hemlock trees, stood the cabin. It was dark, ramshackle, and seemed to have grown organically from the mossy ground. A thin curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney. Hesitantly, Sam approached the small porch. He raised his hand to knock, but before his knuckles could touch the rough-hewn door, it opened inward, silently, revealing the silhouette of an old woman framed against the dim light within. She was frail but imposing, with skin like wrinkled parchment and eyes the color of polished black obsidian. Eyes that seemed to look right through the superficial layers of their fear and into the core of their transgression. She wore simple, rough-spun clothes, and her long, silver-streaked hair was bound in a braid that looked weighted with generations of secrets. "You should not have crossed the broken circle," the woman, Aunt Elara, stated, her voice surprisingly steady and low, devoid of welcome or animosity, only profound, weary knowledge. Leo stammered, holding out the old journal. We were trying to find the logging camp. We didn't know." The fog came and our way back is gone. We heard you might know the stories, the boundaries. Aunt Alara ignored Leo and walked past him, stepping onto the porch. She didn't look at them. She looked at the woods behind them, toward the direction of the logging camp, as if watching an invisible skirmish. The woods are not a game for curious children, she said, her voice rising slightly. You have tracked the beast's pain, and now it tracks your scent. The circle was broken a long time ago, when the saws arrived. The shifter is the memory of that disrespect. It wants not your blood, but your mind, your confusion, your belief that the old ways are just tales. Maya held out the photograph she took of the ancient glyphs on the cedar tree. We found this. The marked-out circles. Aunt Alara took the phone, her thumb brushing over the screen. She sighed, a deep, rattling sound like dry leaves caught in the wind. Those were warnings. The 5 that were scratched out. Those were the men taken in the 1930s. The one you saw freshly drawn on the stone. She looked directly at Leo, her dark eyes piercing him. That was the beast marking its next target. It means its hunger is renewed. And there were 3 of you. A thick silence descended. Leo, Maya, and Sam exchanged horrified glances. The single unscored circle was drawn on the slate rock, and there were 3 of them left standing. The implication was shattering. The creature hadn't finished its count. Sam stepped forward. Aunt Alara, please. You clearly understand this thing. How do we repel it? What are the boundaries? We just want to get to our jeep and leave. The old woman shook her head slowly, her eyes drifting toward the darkening sky. You broke the boundary when you treated this place as merely scenery for your camera. I cannot simply unring that bell. My power is to contain, not to erase recklessness. I am the keeper, not the savior. She turned and pointed to a path leading away from her cabin, deeper into the untouched forest on the rise. The path out is the way you came, but it will not open until the shifter chooses to release its hold. Your best chance is to find the cairn of whispers. What's that? Maya asked, hope flickering in her eyes. An old place of reverence, Aunt Alara explained. The first ones built it to acknowledge the spirit of the woods, not to fight it. It holds a small pocket of the true, uncorrupted essence of this land. If you can find it and show genuine respect, it may grant you enough clear passage to escape the mist. But the cairn is beyond the waterfall on the highest point. That is its domain now. Aunt Alara suddenly gripped Sam's arm, her fingers surprisingly strong. But heed this, young man. The shifter knows you are looking for it. Tonight, the creature will not mimic your loved ones. It will mimic your deepest fears and failures. Be brave, but above all, be honest with what you truly dread. That is the only way to resist its lure. With that chilling warning, Aunt Alara stepped back and began to close the door. They pleaded with her, begging for a torch, for food, for a clearer map, but she gave them only one final cryptic message. Look for the place where the water runs up, not down. That is where the old ones placed the stones. And do not steal anything from this ground. Not a stone, not a leaf, not even a breath of air. The woods take back what is theirs. The door clicked shut, leaving them alone on the porch, staring into the growing darkness. The air around the cabin seemed to instantly warm, and the intense pressure they felt was gone. The rhythmic groaning of the forest was slightly further away. Aunt Alara had created a small pocket of neutral ground, a brief reprieve, but she had offered them no true sanctuary, only a deadly quest toward an unknown cairn. They realized they had wasted precious daylight. The moon was beginning to rise, casting long, distorted shadows through the hemlocks. As they turned to leave, they noticed a small, perfectly preserved feather. A jay feather, bright blue, lying exactly where Aunt Alara had stood. They had not seen a single bird since entering the deep woods. They left the feather where it lay. Respect for ancient knowledge and sacred ground is not a matter of superstition. It is a critical caution. Arrogance and disrespect invite retribution. True help often comes with a difficult price, requiring not rescue, but a demonstration of genuine courage and self-reliance. Aunt Alara, the keeper of the old way, gave them not salvation, but direction. A faint, terrifying thread of hope. To survive, they must now travel into the monster's domain, confronting not only the shifter of the mist, but the dark truths hidden within their own hearts. The moon is their only witness, and the cairn their only prayer. What will the shifter show them when it targets their personal failures? They are about to find out. The journey into the unknown demands more than just courage. It demands a reckoning with the self. Aunt Alara has delivered her warning. The monster now seeks not to mimic loved ones, but to weaponize the raw, festering wounds of regret and fear. Our adventurers must now face their inner demons in a forest that listens to every anxious breath. Brace yourself for the most personal horror yet. The reprieve granted by Aunt Alara's presence was short-lived. Stepping away from her small cabin, the cold clawed back at them, and the silence returned, heavier and more focused. They were now following the subtle upward slope that Maya indicated, moving toward the sound of a rushing waterfall, the one clear landmark in this suffocating moonlit maze. The old woman's cryptic instruction, to look for the place where the water ran up, not down, felt like a riddle preceding a death sentence. Leo, Maya, and Sam walked shoulder to shoulder, their pace driven by a tense, nervous energy. Their fear was no longer a general dread of the dark woods. It was a specific, acute terror of their own minds, knowing that the shifter was listening for the sound of their failures. It was Maya who first felt the change. As they navigated a particularly treacherous section of slippery, moss-covered rocks, she lagged slightly behind. Suddenly, she heard a voice, sharp and demanding, echoing from the shadows of an enormous, looming hemlock. It wasn't her mother's voice, or Leo's or Sam's. You knew better, Maya. You always knew better. Why did you let them talk you into this? You are weak. It was the voice of her most critical high school drama teacher, a woman whose relentless critiques had driven Maya away from her dreams and into a self-imposed shell of caution and anxiety. The voice was perfect, full of sneering disappointment and icy judgment. Maya froze, her breath catching in her throat. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her greatest fear wasn't dying. It was proving her critic right, that she lacked the internal strength to follow her own instinct and would always be led astray by others. Maya, keep up, Sam hissed, turning back. He saw her face, white, strained, eyes wide with internalized pain. What is it? Did you hear that? She stammered, pointing a trembling finger toward the hemlock. That voice, it told me I was weak. It was Mrs. Hemlock, my old teacher. Sam shook his head, his brow furrowed. I didn't hear anything, Maya. Just the water. You have to focus. It's trying to isolate you. It's playing on your mind. They moved faster, but the psychological assault had begun. A few minutes later, it was Sam's turn. He was focusing intensely on the map, trying to reconcile the old ink with the impossible terrain. As he tried to read the contours, a loud, distorted voice boomed from the thick woods beside them. You failed me, Sam. You know you did. You swore you'd be there. You are a liar. This voice was raw, masculine, and laced with genuine grief. It sounded exactly like his estranged father, the man Sam had bitterly disappointed by abandoning their family farm duties to pursue engineering in the city. The memory of leaving his father alone with a failing business was Sam's most profound regret, a secret guilt he carried like a stone in his gut. Sam stumbled, dropping the map. He slammed his hands over his ears, his shoulders shaking. "Shut up. I couldn't help it. I tried. I couldn't save it," he shouted, desperate to silence the phantom accusation. Leo grabbed him, shaking him hard. "Sam, it's the shifter. It's not real. It's just sound. Sam, just a trick. You didn't hear that?" Sam looked at Leo wild-eyed. "It was my dad. He called me a liar. He called me a failure." Leo felt a chill that cut deeper than the night air. He hadn't heard a thing. He had only heard Sam's terrified shout. The shifter was not broadcasting a message to all of them. It was whispering specific, tailored venom directly into the mind of its target. It had truly separated them, even when they were touching. Now it was Leo's turn. They were traversing a small, rocky ridge, the sound of the waterfall growing louder. Leo was forcing himself to be the leader, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. He was concentrating fiercely on Aunt Alara's directions when a high-pitched, childish whimper sounded right at his heel, sounding exactly like his 7-year-old sister, Lily. "Leo, why did you leave me? I'm scared and you're gone forever." Leo stopped dead, a guttural sound tearing from his chest. Lily was the core of his ambition. He was making films to get money for her medical treatment, which he felt was his sole responsibility after his parents' divorce. He had always feared that his reckless pursuits would ultimately jeopardize her well-being. The voice was so fragile, so heartbreakingly real, that Leo's entire foundation crumbled. "Lily? No, I didn't leave you," he whispered, dropping his pack and frantically searching the surrounding rocks. "I'm coming. Where are you, Lily?" Sam and Maya grabbed him, pulling him back from the edge of the ridge. "Leo, stop. She's hundreds of miles away. It's the monster, Leo. Don't let it fool you." Leo fought them, sobbing, convinced his sister was trapped somewhere in the fog, scared and alone because of his selfishness. The phantom whimper continued, fading slightly with each step they pulled him away, drawing his gaze to the darkness. "It works. It knows our secrets," Maya gasped, horrified. "It's not trying to kill us with claws. It's trying to make us run into the dark, alone." They were forced to rely entirely on nonverbal communication, using desperate tugs and grips to pull one another through the worst of the psychological attacks. They moved in a tight, desperate line, each person enduring private, horrific accusations, constantly checking to see if their companions were still beside them, or if the person walking next to them was the real one. Finally, they reached the waterfall. It wasn't large, but the water volume was immense, plunging 30 feet into a churning, frothing pool below. The roaring sound of the water provided an immediate, blessed shield against the whispering attacks of the shifter. For the first time since entering the fog, they felt a fragile sense of safety. Maya pulled out the map, pointing toward the steep bank on the opposite side of the rushing water. "The cairn has to be up there," Aunt Alara said, to look for where the water runs up. They found a narrow, unstable log stretching across a rocky choke point. Sam, the strongest, went first, testing the integrity of the slick wood. He made it across and helped pull Maya over. Leo was last. As he placed his foot on the log, the noise shield of the waterfall momentarily failed. Not silenced, but distorted. Over the rushing water, a unified, monstrous chorus began to roar, weaving together the terrifying imitations they had just heard. "Liar. We. Gone forever." The voices were no longer separate. They were one unified shriek of failure and condemnation, focusing entirely on Leo. He lost his footing and slid, dropping his remaining bag and the heavy journal into the churning pool. He scrambled across the log, soaked and shaking, collapsing onto the opposite bank beside Sam and Maya. The ancient journal, their only tangible link to the history of the creature, was gone, swallowed by the waterfall's dark mouth. They stood, staring up at the steep, mist-shrouded slope above them. They had escaped the initial lure of the shifter's imitation game, but they had lost their historical guide and their emotional stability was shattered. They were left with nothing but the raw knowledge of each other's deepest, most crippling regrets. Fear seeks to divide us, and deception thrives on isolation. True strength is not the absence of fear or regret, but the courage to stand shoulder to shoulder with companions, trusting them even when your own mind is being turned against you. Trust is the counterweapon to deceit. The shifter's whispers had found their marks, tearing open old wounds and testing the bonds between the three friends. They have survived the imitation game, but they are wounded and exposed. Ahead of them lies the summit, the waterfall's highest point, and the ancient stones of the Cairn of Whispers. Will the cairn offer sanctuary, or is it merely another, more terrifying boundary in the monster's endless domain? They must climb and find out. They survived the whispers, but the shifter's patience is wearing thin. When psychological warfare fails, a predator resorts to brute force. Our young adventurers now climb toward the Cairn of Whispers, hoping for sanctuary, unaware that they are ascending into the creature's most sacred and terrible domain. The true face of the forest's anger is about to be revealed. The ascent from the waterfall's pool was brutal. The slope was a sheer tapestry of wet shale and thick, grasping underbrush. Above them, the moonlight strained to penetrate the high canopy, casting the climb in fractured shadows that played tricks on their exhausted minds. The rhythmic roar of the waterfall, their temporary shield, began to diminish as they moved upward, leaving them once again exposed to the forest's sinister silence. Maya, guided by the memory of the faint map lines, focused on the terrain. She was searching for Aunt Alara's clue, the place where the water runs up. About halfway up the climb, she found it. The ground became oddly dry, and the shale transitioned into smooth, rounded stones. A small, narrow channel was carved into the rock face, and though no water was flowing in it, the moss and lichen grew in a distinctive reverse direction, clinging to the uphill side as if resisting a perpetual, invisible flow. "This is it," Maya gasped, pointing. "The channel. It's like the stream is running back up the hill." Sam, clinging to a gnarled cedar root, nodded. "An energy signature, maybe. Something unnatural holding the flow back. We're close." He was fighting back the residue of fear from his father's phantom voice, his mind a battlefield of guilt and survival instinct. Leo, emotionally spent from the attack on his sister's memory, pulled himself up beside them, his eyes scanning the immediate area for any physical trace of the monster. The loss of the journal felt like a crucial mistake, amplifying his sense of failure. They followed the dry channel, which soon led them to a small, level plateau nestled high on the ridge. There, at the center of the clearing, was a monument unlike anything they had seen. The Cairn of Whispers. It was a massive pile of smoothly rounded river stones, stacked with incredible precision to a height of about 10 feet. But it wasn't the stones that drew their attention. It was the strange, wooden object standing guard beside it. It was an ancient totem pole, roughly carved from a single log, but unlike the vibrant totem art of the coast, this one was minimalist and deeply unsettling. The wood was black with age, and it depicted 3 figures. A man with his mouth sewn shut, a large bird with broken wings, and at the very top, a squat, faceless thing carved in a shape that resembled both a bear and a pooling shadow. But the totem was not intact. A heavy, jagged section had been hacked away from the bottom figure, leaving a splintered, ragged wound in the wood. It was a clear, devastating violation of the sacred site. The broken totem, Leo whispered, realizing the weight of Aunt Alara's warning about the broken circle. This is what was violated. This is where the respect ended. As Maya approached the cairn, she saw something that made her stomach turn. Strewn around the base of the sacred stone pile were pieces of debris, rusted nails, broken bottles of cheap whiskey, and a scattering of spent shotgun shells. The site hadn't been revered. It had been desecrated, likely by generations of loggers or reckless trespassers. The very moment Maya registered the desecration, the peaceful energy of the plateau shattered. A cold wind, sharp and sudden, whipped through the grove, extinguishing their headlamps and sending the mist swirling violently. The air around the cairn began to vibrate, a deep, low frequency that resonated painfully in their teeth and bones. Felt like standing inside a massive, dying bell. "It knows we're here," Sam shouted over the noise, crouching low and drawing his machete. "It knew we'd find the desecration." The vibrating air coalesced. The thick, silver-white fog that had followed them began to funnel directly toward the cairn, moving with impossible speed. It gathered around the broken totem, swirling violently, then condensing into a shape. It wasn't a bear or a Sasquatch or a human mimic. It was an entity of pure, terrifying abstraction. The creature, the shifter of the mist, stood before them as a massive, fluid column of shadow and condensed moisture. It seemed to lack solid form, yet it towered over them, a mass of swirling darkness against the faint moonlight. Its outline constantly shifted, one moment, a colossal, four-legged silhouette. The next, a tall, distorted figure with long, dripping arms that scraped the ground. It had no discernible face, but they felt the crushing weight of its gaze. An ancient, furious intelligence focused solely on their destruction. A sound ripped through the plateau, a sound that was not a roar or a shriek, but a terrible, unnatural tearing noise, like heavy canvas ripping apart. The shifter lunged, not with its claws, but with a silent, devastating surge of its fluid body. Sam reacted on instinct. He raised his machete to block, but the creature didn't make contact in a physical sense. The sheer pressure of the moving mass hit him, throwing him backwards like a rag doll against the cairn. His breath was knocked from his lungs, and he felt a burst of icy pain where his shoulder struck the stones. Maya and Leo scrambled back, terrified. The shifter focused on Sam, circling the cairn, its form momentarily taking the shape of a colossal, shadowy wolf, its head dipping as if sniffing its prey. "The disrespect," Leo yelled, remembering Aunt Alara's words. "It's karma. It's defending the broken circle." He saw the shattered portion of the totem pole, lying half-buried in the moss. Driven by a desperate, reckless impulse, Leo darted forward, grabbed the broken, splintered piece of wood, and threw it with all his might toward the creature's base. The impact was minor, but the effect was instantaneous. Where the rottenwood fragment struck the shadowy mass, the shifter hissed, a sound of sizzling steam and spitting static, and recoiled violently, its form momentarily dissipating into a harmless burst of fog. "The wood!" Maya cried out, understanding dawning in her fear-addled mind. "The ancient wood. The spirit of the land doesn't want the pollution. It hates the violation." The creature reformed instantly, but it was slower now, its movements more constrained, as if the very air around the cairn had become thick and viscous. It was enraged. It raised one dripping, amorphous arm and slammed it down onto their abandoned backpacks. The bags, which contained their remaining food, emergency supplies, and Leo's last water bottle, were instantly flattened, shredded into damp, useless scraps. The creature was physically destroying their means of survival, leaving them starving, exposed, and exhausted. Sam slowly pulled himself up, clutching his arm. "It's feeding its pain," he wheezed, watching the monster circle the perimeter. "It wants us to be lost and broken like the wood." They realized the truth of Aunt Alara's warning. This was not a creature they could kill. It was an element, a curse, the manifestation of the forest's profound, generational trauma. They had to appease the cairn, not defeat the shifter. Leo suddenly remembered the instructions. The place where the water runs up, an old place of reverence. Show genuine respect. He looked at Maya and Sam. The cairn is a marker of respect. The shifter recoiled when I threw the broken piece. A physical violation. We have to do the opposite. Maya, despite her terror, looked around quickly and spotted a cluster of smooth, unblemished river stones that had rolled down from the main pile. She rushed forward, avoiding the outer sweep of the shifter's shadow, and picked up 3 large stones, handing one to Leo and one to Sam. "Reverence," she murmured, her voice steady. "We rebuild the respect." Under the watchful, raging shadow of the shifter, the 3 teenagers began stacking the stones onto the cairn, slowly, carefully, with deliberate respect. The silence returned, but this time, it was the shifter that was still. It stood suspended, a massive, shadowy column, watching them, its internal energy vibrating but unable to strike. As they placed the final stones, completing a small, new layer of tribute, a sudden, blinding flash of light erupted from the top of the Cairn of Whispers. It wasn't electricity. It was a pure, dazzling white gold light, radiating warmth and strength. The light struck the shifter, and the creature dissolved with a sound like wind tearing through rock, scattering into nothing but harmless, drifting mist. They were safe, momentarily, within the protective bubble of the cairn's light. But they were deep in the wilderness, without food, without shelter, and the monster, though repelled, was certainly not gone. True accountability is more than just admitting a mistake. It is the act of respectfully rebuilding what was broken. The old wounds of the earth require reverence and repair. When facing insurmountable supernatural power, look for the source of the curse, not the strength to defeat it. The Cairn of Whispers had offered its protection, but it was a temporary truce bought with courage and respect. They have seen the shifter's terrifying power, and they know its link to the land's ancient pain. They have their lives, but little else. Trapped on the high ridge, with the cairn's light their only defense against the returning darkness, they must now find the historical answer that lies hidden nearby, the key to unlocking the shifter's hold on the forest. What did the original logger find? They must know. Before the light fades and the shadow returns, the Cairn of Whispers had offered its protection, but it was a temporary truce bought with courage and respect. They have seen the shifter's terrifying power, and they know its link to the land's ancient pain. They have their lives, but little else. Trapped on the high ridge, with the cairn's light their only defense against the returning darkness, they must now find the historical answer that lies hidden nearby, the key to unlocking the shifter's hold on the forest. What did the original logger find? They must know. Before the light fades and the shadow returns, proceed with extreme caution. The white gold light emanating from the top of the Cairn of Whispers was a beacon of warmth and safety in the cold, encroaching darkness. It wasn't physical heat, but a deep, comforting energy that pushed back the lingering chill of the shifter's presence. Within its radius, the mist thinned to a harmless haze, and the oppressive silence gave way to the gentle hum of the wind through the tall trees. Leo, Maya, and Sam huddled close to the ancient stone pile, their bodies aching, their minds reeling from the confrontation. Sam was cradling his bruised shoulder, wincing with every movement. Maya, though physically unharmed, felt the phantom whispers of her teacher's voice still echoing in her mind. Leo, though momentarily triumphant from repelling the shifter, was haunted by the chilling truth of his deepest fears. "We bought ourselves some time," Sam rasped, testing his arm. "But we can't stay here forever. That light won't last and we're exposed. No food, no water, no real way to navigate." Maya looked at the cairn, then at the broken totem. Aunt Alara said the cairn was a place of reverence and held a small pocket of the true, uncorrupted essence of this land. "We need more than defense, we need an exit. We need to find whatever the first people placed here." Driven by desperation, Leo cautiously approached the tallest part of the stone pile, where the light seemed strongest. He pressed his ear against the cold, smooth stones, listening to the faint, rhythmic humming sound emanating from deep within the cairn, the sound of a forgotten heart. As he listened, he felt the same fleeting, fragmented images of the past. The pristine forest, the first people, and the placement of a small, dark object at the base. He pulled his head back, shaken. "It's a record, a memory," he breathed, looking at Maya and Sam. "I saw them build it, placing something at its foundation." Maya, following the impulse, placed her hand on the base of the cairn and closed her eyes. She focused intensely on the hum, pushing away the invasive thoughts of failure. A clearer image coalesced in her mind. A small, dark crevice at the very bottom of the cairn, cleverly hidden beneath a loose, triangular stone, almost invisible to the casual eye. "There's something hidden," she whispered, opening her eyes and pointing to a spot obscured by decades of moss and soil. "Under that triangular stone. It's a niche." Working together, they carefully dislodged the stone, which was surprisingly heavy, and revealed a shallow earthen recess. The air that rushed out was stale and cold, carrying the faint, unmistakable smell of old leather and damp earth. Tucked inside the recess, wrapped in a brittle piece of oilcloth, were two things. The first was a cluster of polished, dark river stones, bound tightly together with sinew, clearly a sacred offering. The second was a brittle, heavy object that instantly filled Leo with dread. A human shoulder bone, cracked and bleached white. The bone belonged to a man, and clutched tightly in the bony fingers, still wedged between the thumb and forefinger, was a small, tattered piece of paper, the final page of a journal, water-stained and warped, but written in the same distinctive, frantic hand as the book Leo had lost in the waterfall. "The logger," Leo murmured, his voice hollow. "The man from 1930. He didn't vanish. He made it here." He hid his remains and his final warning inside the cairn. Sam knelt down, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, and gently retrieved the note. The sight of the human remains, the concrete evidence of the horror they were facing, was more terrifying than any phantom voice. This was the final fate of the 5 marked out on the cedar tree. The writing was scrawled with desperate urgency, the ink bleeding slightly into the paper fibers. Sam read the final, horrifying entry aloud. "October 28th. Made it. The light holds it back. Not forever. Not forever. I used the last of my sense to find the stones. It showed me how it hunts. It feeds on confusion and debt. If you feel the doubt, it gets closer. If you feel the blame, it gets stronger. It ain't just mist. It's the memory of what was taken from the woods. My last act is to hide this truth here. My body is the final offering to appease the cairn. If you read this, do not turn back the way you came. It will be waiting. You must go through the valley, past the black water, and find the place where the silence is absolute. It's the way out. They call it the Sentinel's Gate. Tell them the debt is unpaid." The entry ended there, a profound, chilling note of warning and sacrifice. The logger had understood the shifter's nature. It was fueled by emotional weakness and the unresolved debt of the land's violation. He had used his own death to secure the note and offer his life to the cairn, buying anyone who followed a final piece of vital intelligence. As Sam finished reading, the cairn's beautiful white gold light flickered, the humming sound faltering. A new sound pierced the night, the distinct, aggressive snapping of large branches just outside the perimeter of the light. The shifter was testing the bounds of the cairn's protection, its patience finally exhausted. "It knows we found the truth," Maya whispered, her eyes fixed on the surrounding shadows. "It knows we have its weakness." They knew they couldn't linger. They had the map, not a physical one, but a final, terrifying instruction. Go through the valley, past the black water, find the Sentinel's Gate. To go through meant descending the ridge and heading deeper into the forest, not circling back to the safer, known route. It was counterintuitive, but the logger's sacrifice confirmed the danger of returning the way they came. Leo carefully took the tightly bound river stones, the logger's final offering, and tucked them safely into his pocket. "These are sacred now," he said, his voice resolute. "Aunt Alara said the woods take back what is theirs. We need to honor this debt. We need to complete his escape." Just as the shifter's shadowy form began to press against the fading light, distorting the air and causing the stones of the cairn to tremble, Maya saw something else. Tucked beneath the polished stones, she found a single unbroken arrowhead, not made of flint, but of a strange, opaque black glass, smoothed by time. She picked it up. As her fingers closed around the glass, the cairn's light flared brightly for one last, glorious second, imprinting a momentary, subtle mental image in her mind. A path, winding downward and westward, marked by ancient, naturally occurring stone steps, hidden beneath centuries of moss. "I see the way out," she announced, gripping the arrowhead. "The Sentinel's Gate. It's a pathway descending toward the creek, but hidden. We have to go now, before the light fails completely." With no time left for debate, the three teens began their desperate descent, leaving the cairn of whispers behind. The logger's memory served as their guide, his final, honest act of sacrifice granting them a terrifying, narrow chance at freedom. They left his remains exactly where they were, ensuring the debt he paid remained honored. The truth, however horrifying, is the only real weapon against deception. Sometimes the path to survival requires going toward the greater fear, not away from it, and honoring the sacrifices of the past to secure a future. The logger's terrifying final message has given them purpose, but the cost of that knowledge was the end of all doubt. The shifter of the mist is fueled by their fear and the land's old wound. They are descending into the heart of the monster's territory, guided by a ghost and a fragile black stone. The Sentinel's Gate awaits, but what lies between the cairn and that final, absolute silence? They must travel in darkness to find the light. They have traded defense for a desperate offensive, guided by the final plea of a man long dead. They must go through the valley of the shifter, where the forest's deepest traumas reside. The truth of the shifter's power, feeding on debt and confusion, means every step forward is a risk. To gain freedom, a sacrifice will be demanded, and one of our companions is about to face the ultimate test. The descent was a controlled scramble through thickets of rhododendron and slick, black moss, illuminated only by the faint moonlight that occasionally pierced the canopy. Maya led the way, relying on the instinctual map the black glass arrowhead had imprinted on her mind. It showed a series of ancient, nearly dissolved stone steps, a hidden path known only to the first keepers of the woods. As they moved downward, the oppressive fog returned, but this time it was different. It didn't swirl in white sheets. It clung to the ground like a sticky, black liquid, obscuring their footing and making every step treacherous. They were entering the valley of the black water, the darkest, most saturated part of the forest, exactly where the logger's warning said they must go. The shifter of the mist was no longer content with mimicry or brute force. Now it attacked their morale. The low, continuous groaning sound they had heard earlier was back, louder and closer. It sounded like 1,000 trees weeping, but beneath that sound, the teens began to hear human voices, not mimicking their loved ones, but echoing the sounds of their own past mistakes. Leo heard the spectral sound of his camera shutter clicking wildly, followed by the mocking, silent cheers of imaginary online viewers, a perverse soundtrack to his ambition. Sam heard the shattering of glass, the sound of the old farmhouse window breaking during the storm he wasn't there to fix. Maya heard the sound of her own desperate sobbing from years ago, when she felt completely alone and powerless. The shifter was reminding them of the emotional debt they carried, hoping to make them stumble or turn on each other. They pushed onward, relying purely on touch and whispered assurances. Sam, despite his throbbing shoulder, used his good arm to clear the path, trying to focus only on the rhythmic action of the machete. Maya held the black glass arrowhead tight, its cold surface a small anchor in the chaos. They finally reached the valley floor. It was a boggy, desolate space dominated by a stagnant pool of water so dark it looked like polished oil, the black water. The air here was heavy, smelling of sulfur and rot. The trees were skeletal, half submerged in the mire, and the entire atmosphere felt like a draining, magnetic pull on their willpower. "We have to cross it," Maya whispered, pointing to a small rise on the opposite side where the trees looked slightly denser. "The Sentinel's Gate must be over there." As they began the agonizing, slow process of wading through the sticky, freezing water, the attack intensified. The shifter, in its shadowy, fluid form, materialized briefly on the far bank, massive and terrifying. It didn't rush them. Instead, it focused its entire will, turning the air around them into a crucible of doubt. Leo suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to turn back. He felt convinced that the logger's note was a lie, a trick by the beast to draw them into this deadly valley. He saw an imaginary flash of the cairn, shining brightly, beckoning him back to safety. His sister's whimper returned, now accusing him of leading them all into a trap. Sam felt a crushing wave of fatigue. His bruised shoulder felt broken, and the muddy water felt like concrete boots. He suddenly believed that the logical thing to do was stop, conserve his energy, and let the others go ahead. A voice that sounded like his own inner monologue told him, "You're the strongest. You should rest. They can make it. You're slowing them down." Maya's focus was blurred by crippling guilt. She felt responsible for bringing them here, for pushing the initial curiosity. The image of the single, unscored circle on the slate rock flashed in her mind, and she felt the certainty that the shifter needed one body to complete its count. She realized, with devastating clarity, that the beast was trying to make one of them break and sacrifice themselves to save the others. The creature's true power was the ability to create terminal selflessness and crippling paranoia. They were nearing the middle of the pool when the shifter began its final, desperate maneuver. The mist around Sam suddenly condensed, twisting into a dark vortex right beside him. The feeling of extreme cold was back, focused entirely on his injured arm, which now screamed with excruciating pain. The monster was targeting the point of his vulnerability. "It's here. It's right beside me," Sam roared, trying to swing his machete, but his arm refused to cooperate. He saw the shadowy mass begin to solidify, taking the rough shape of a massive, multi-limbed thing that was dragging him down into the black water. "Leave me," Sam yelled, shoving Maya and Leo forward with his good arm. Go. It wants me. It wants the debt. I can hold it for a minute. Just go find the gate. He was prepared to make the ultimate heroic sacrifice, believing that his life was the required toll to save his friends. The conviction in his voice was absolute. The monster's psychological warfare had worked. But Maya and Leo knew the shifter's game. They remembered the logger's final, clear warning. It feeds on confusion and debt. To offer a sacrifice would be to validate the creature's hunger and potentially seal their own fates, and Sam's, into the Earth's endless cycle of pain. Leo, forgetting his fear and his exhaustion, plunged back toward Sam. He reached into his pocket and grabbed the cluster of river stones the logger had offered to the cairn, the proof of an honored debt. He didn't have time to think. He hurled the stones, not at the monster, but deep into the black water right beside Sam. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The moment the sacred, honored stones disturbed the stagnant, dark pool, the water churned violently, and the shadowy vortex surrounding Sam recoiled with a terrible, hissing cry of pure anguish and rage. The shifter shrieked, an ear-splitting sound of tearing metal, and the condensed shadow dispersed instantly. Leo didn't hesitate. He grabbed Sam's collar and dragged him out of the black water, pulling him onto the small, muddy bank. They were soaked, freezing, and had just escaped the creature's ultimate trap. Sam was breathing heavily. His mind cleared of the suicidal conviction. His eyes wide with the horror of what he had almost done. The monster had forced him to be prepared to die for his friends. A selfless act. But in this cursed place, selflessness born of guilt was exactly what the shifter craved. The shifter, repelled but not defeated, appeared again on the far side of the valley, a vast, swirling cloud of malevolence. It was cornered, knowing they had the final piece of the map, and it began to charge. They had moments. The gate. Where is the Sentinel's gate? Leo shouted, his voice cracking. Maya, clutching the black arrowhead, looked up at the dense rise of the opposite bank. Look for the absolute silence, she instructed, remembering the logger's words. The place where the forest stops listening. Selflessness is admirable, but in the face of karma and spiritual debt, the greatest bravery is not sacrifice, but the refusal to pay a price that the enemy demands. Honoring the truth and the historical debt is the only currency that matters against the ancient curse. They refused to give the shifter its offering, buying them precious seconds of life. They are cornered between a charging monster and an unknown threshold. The final key is the absolute silence, a stillness that exists only where the forest itself is guarded from the monster's trauma. They must find the Sentinel's gate, or be consumed by the shadow that now rushes toward them with the speed of pure vengeance. The moment of reckoning has arrived. Cornered by a relentless, enraged entity, our young explorers must rely on their courage and the cryptic wisdom of the dead. The Sentinel's gate is the key, but to find the place of absolute silence, they must ignore every natural instinct and move directly into the deepest heart of the cursed wood. The final boundary is about to be tested. The shifter of the mist, having been twice denied its sacrifice, was furious. The shadowy mass swelled on the opposite side of the black water, its form less fluid and more aggressively solid now, resembling a colossal, spiked silhouette rushing toward them with sickening speed. The air was filled with a desperate, soundless roar, the pure sound of the forest's ancient, unyielding rage. Leo, Maya, and Sam scrambled up the muddy bank, their clothes clinging to them like icy shrouds. They knew they had mere seconds before the creature crossed the stagnant pool. The silence! Leo yelled, pointing frantically at the dense wall of trees ahead. We have to find the place where the silence is absolute. Maya, gripping the black glass arrowhead like a talisman, looked at the trees. The forest here was not silent. It was groaning, whispering, and echoing with the shifter's malice. Every instinct screamed at her to run horizontally, away from the monster, but the logger's note was clear. They had to go through. Suddenly, the arrowhead in her hand grew intensely cold, sending a spike of focused, nonverbal knowledge into her mind. She turned not towards the thickest part of the forest, but toward a narrow, almost invisible cleft between two massive, moss-covered boulders, a passage barely wider than her shoulders. "In here!" she shouted, pointing. "It's the only way that feels different." Sam, ignoring the burning pain in his arm, shoved Leo into the narrow passage first, then followed, shielding Maya with his body. They squeezed through the dark, cold gap between the ancient stones. The transition was instantaneous and overwhelming. 1 second, they were in the hellish cacophony of the shifter's domain, battered by fear and noise. The next, they stepped onto a small, dry patch of ground, and everything vanished. The heavy, metallic smell of the black water was gone. The chilling fog dissipated, leaving the air dry and crisp. Most astonishingly, the sound barrier was absolute. There was no wind, no creak of branches, no hum of insects, and no sound of the shifter's charging presence. It was a terrifying, complete absence of noise, a vacuum that seemed to swallow even the sound of their own ragged breathing. "The Sentinel's Gate," Sam breathed, his voice a soundless puff of air, his mouth open in disbelief. He looked back. The cleft between the boulders was now sealed by a natural curtain of intertwined roots and thick ivy, looking impenetrable. They had stepped into a pocket of true, uncorrupted silence. This was the Sentinel's territory, a hidden patch of land preserved from the moment the shifter's curse began. The clearing they found themselves in was small and circular, ringed by ancient trees far older and more massive than any they had yet seen. These trees were not weeping. They were straight, majestic, and seemed to stand in judgment. In the center of the clearing stood a single, weathered obelisk of smooth, gray stone, unlike the rough stones of the cairn. Leo approached the obelisk cautiously. Unlike the warnings they had found before, this stone was engraved with a single massive symbol, a perfect, unbroken circle surrounding a stylized image of a key or a staff. Maya realized the significance. "The unbroken circle," she whispered, her voice feeling deafening even to her own ears. "It's the opposite of the broken circle they warned us about. This is the seal, the way out." Sam noticed something even more critical. On the ground around the obelisk were faint, nearly invisible tracks, the three-toed, massive tracks of the shifter. But here they did not lead inward. They circled the perimeter of the clearing, stopping abruptly at the edge of the silent zone, unable to cross. The shifter was locked out. They were safe, but they had only bought time. The silence felt temporary, a powerful but fragile shield. They knew the shifter would find a way to breach the gate if they simply stood there. They needed to activate the key, the final release point. As they stood by the obelisk, the soundlessness began to press in on them, becoming physically painful, inducing a low-grade vertigo. Leo instinctively reached for the pocket holding the sacred stones from the cairn, the final offering from the dead logger. He felt an intense certainty, a profound resonance between the stones and the obelisk. Leo pulled out the dark, polished cluster of stones. They began to glow faintly with the same white-gold light they had seen at the cairn. He looked at the obelisk and saw a small, smooth indentation at its base, a natural slot that looked perfect for receiving the stones. "This is the last piece," Leo said, his voice a profound, echoing whisper in the quiet. "The logger's final act of repayment. We have to finish the debt." With reverence and total focus, Leo placed the cluster of stones into the indentation. The moment they settled, the obelisk began to emit a deep, clear resonance. The ground beneath them trembled, and a powerful wind exploded outward from the clearing, a force of nature so strong it nearly knocked them off their feet. The wind was not ordinary. It was a cleansing force, a breath of pure, ancient air that tore through the invisible sentinel's gate and ripped through the woods they had just escaped. They heard a terrifying sound, a high-pitched, echoing screech of pain and furious defeat. It was the shifter finally pushed back by the activated gate. The wind carried the sound of tearing branches, shattering wood, and the rapid dispersal of the thick, black fog. The spell over the forest was momentarily broken. The sentinel's gate had successfully pushed the creature back to its deep, silent prison. As the wind subsided, the obelisk ceased its glowing. The profound, physical silence of the clearing vanished, replaced by the normal, natural sounds of the forest. The chirp of a distant bird, the gentle rustle of leaves, the sound of a normal, healthy creek flowing nearby. The curse had lifted, at least for now. They looked at each other, stunned, exhausted, but alive. They had done it. They had escaped the most mysterious monster sighting in American history. But the relief was tragically incomplete. Looking out from the clearing, they saw their escape. A faint, clear game trail leading downhill, visible now that the black fog was gone. It led straight out to the older, paved county road. They were safe. Yet, as they began to walk, they noticed Sam was lagging. He was standing by the obelisk, his head bowed, looking not at the path, but back toward the dark cleft in the rocks. "Sam," Maya asked, turning back. "We're free. Let's go." Sam didn't move. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused, fixed on the path they had just taken. "I hear it," he murmured, his voice heavy with a terrible, final conviction. The monster, it was pushed back, but it only pushed back the parts it used to hunt. The core, the heart of the curse, it's still here. He turned to Leo and Maya, his expression heartbreakingly calm. The logger's circle was scratched over 5 times. The one on the slate rock was one fresh circle, for the 3 of us. The shifter wanted one of us to remain, a sacrifice to feed the forest's debt. We honored the dead logger's debt, but we didn't honor this debt. "Sam, stop. We got out. We're not doing this." Leo rushed toward him, terrified. Sam shook his head, placing his injured arm over the symbol on the obelisk. "My failure, my guilt over the farm, that's the debt I brought with me. It won't let us leave clean. If all 3 of us walk out, the curse will follow us, and it will be stronger. It will find us later when we're alone." His voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. "I have to stay here in the silence. I have to be the sentinel. I have to honor the debt that I carried in my heart. The shifter feeds on confusion. I have clarity now. I won't be taken. I'll stay. I will be the unbroken circle." Before Leo or Maya could fully grasp the enormity of his choice, Sam took one final, deliberate step back toward the dense, ivy-choked cleft, the entrance to the shifter's silent prison. True bravery is understanding that there are some spiritual debts that must be paid. The greatest sacrifice is not a frantic, panicked selflessness, but a deliberate, calm act of choice, made not from guilt, but from the clarity of honoring a profound, deeply personal truth. Sam's choice shattered the victory into 1,000 painful pieces. He has become the final sentinel, ensuring the shifter's wrath remains contained within the woods. Leo and Maya are free, but they walk away with a ghost at their side and a terrible question. Was Sam's sacrifice necessary, or the shifter's final, devastating victory? They now face the world, forever changed by the true monster sighting in American history, The silence of the sentinel's gate now holds a new, unbearable weight. The presence of a choice, a sacrifice made for the greater safety of the land. Leo and Maya are free, but they carry the haunting echo of their friend's farewell. They must now navigate the final miles of the woods and confront the true nature of their escape, a freedom won at an unimaginable cost. Caution is advised, for the shifter's influence is subtle, even outside its prison. Leo didn't weep, he was past it. He stood paralyzed, staring at the thick, green curtain of ivy and roots that now obscured the cleft in the rocks, the spot where Sam had deliberately turned his back on safety and walked toward the sentinel's silence. Maya gripped Leo's arm, pulling him gently, urgently, toward the visible game trail that led down the ridge. "We have to go," Maya whispered, her voice tight with suppressed agony. "He made his choice. We have to honor it. If we stay, his sacrifice was for nothing." Leo finally stumbled forward, his legs moving on pure, mechanical instinct. The forest they walked through now was utterly normal. The air smelled of pine and damp leaves, the ground was firm, and the sounds of the natural world, the distant cry of a hawk, the rush of a clear-running stream, were ordinary, yet jarringly unfamiliar after the terrifying silence and deceptive mimicry. The journey downhill was a blur of exhaustion and trauma. They followed the path, which quickly widened into a recognizable, though overgrown, footpath. The forest was no longer hostile. It was indifferent. The shifter of the mist was gone, bound to the heart of the valley, held in place by the sentinel's gate and the unexpected payment of Sam's honest, deliberate choice. As they walked, Maya clutched the black glass arrowhead, the artifact that had shown them the true way out. She realized that the shifter was not a killer fueled by anger, but a curse sustained by imbalance and unacknowledged debt. Sam, by recognizing and choosing to pay his own deeply personal debt, the failure to honor his father's farm, had provided the final, profound clarity needed to temporarily seal the gate. He became the human anchor, the permanent, unconfused presence the creature could not feed upon. They finally reached the edge of the woods, where the footpath met a dirt turnoff leading to the gravel county road. They stepped out of the woods and onto the hard, familiar surface of the road. The sunlight, though weak, felt searing on their faces, and the sound of an approaching truck's engine was an overwhelming symphony of the normal world. The moment they emerged, they saw the Jeep. It was exactly where they had left it, mud-splattered and sturdy. Their eyes fell immediately upon the pile of stones Leo had placed to mark the forbidden turnoff, the same pile Aunt Alara had silently observed. The stones were still there, and next to them, standing perfectly still, was Aunt Alara herself. She was watching them, her obsidian eyes calm but deeply sorrowful. She didn't approach. She simply waited as they stumbled toward her, collapsing onto the roadside gravel. "You have been purified by the old ways," Aunt Alara stated, her voice soft but carrying the weight of the mountain. "The shifter is bound, but the debt is settled only for a time. It will hunger again when the world forgets to respect the cost." Leo, finally finding his voice, choked out the painful question. "Sam, why? Did he have to stay? Couldn't we have all left?" Aunt Alara looked past them, toward the distant ridge they had descended. "The beast is fed by confusion and refusal of truth. Your friend, Samuel, he found clarity where you too found fear. He understood that the forest demanded a price for the transgression of curiosity and logging, a price you brought with you in the form of your regrets. By choosing to stay, he turned his debt into a purpose. He is not dead, he is the sentinel. He is the truth that holds the lie prisoner." She then walked to the Jeep and retrieved a small, neatly folded blanket and a thermos of steaming, herb-infused water. She handed them the provisions. "You are now keepers of a different truth. You must never forget the cost of the ground you walk upon. Maya, tears finally streaming down her face, looked at the black glass arrowhead in her hand. What do we do now? How do we live with this? Aunt Ilara gently touched Maya's cheek. You tell the story honestly. You live your lives without the debts you carried in your heart, for Sam paid them for you, and you keep the silence. You never return to the broken lands. As she spoke, a sudden heavy wave of damp, silver-white fog rolled down the distant ridge, moving with the same unnatural speed they had witnessed before. It was a faint, final warning, a reminder that the shifter was still there, testing the boundaries of its prison, pushing against the sentinel's presence. The sight of the fog, even distant, was enough to push them to their feet. They got into the jeep, their bodies broken, their souls etched with horror. As Leo started the engine, he looked in the rearview mirror. Aunt Ilara was gone. Only the silence and the distant, silver-white mist remained. They drove away from Cascade County, leaving behind the immense forest and the spectral echo of their friend. They had survived the most mysterious monster sighting in American history, but the terrifying truth was not the creature they saw, but the price they paid for seeing it. True healing and freedom require an honest reckoning with the burdens we carry. When facing supernatural curses fueled by the past, one must accept that some debts are personal, and some sacrifices, however devastating, are necessary to restore balance and secure the truth. Leo and Maya drove toward the rising sun, two survivors carrying the immense weight of a third, silent passenger, the certainty of what they left behind. Their lives are forever altered, their knowledge of the American wilderness now a profound, terrifying burden. But the story isn't over. They must now find a way to honor Sam's sacrifice and navigate a world that will never believe the haunting truth of the shifter and the Sentinel's gate. How will they tell the story? And what happens when the shifter's silence finally breaks? The journey ends, but the haunting never fades. Leo and Maya escaped the darkness of the Cascade Woods, but they carry the terrifying burden of the truth, the price paid by their friend, the Sentinel. In this final chapter, we witness the legacy of Sam's sacrifice and learn that the most mysterious monster sighting in American history is not just a tale of horror, but a profound lesson on the enduring power of honesty and the hidden costs of the wild. The drive away from Cascade County was silent, stretching into an agonizing 8-hour blur. They were two figures bathed in the cool light of dawn, forever separated from the world by the knowledge of the Sentinel's gate. Leo drove mechanically, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Maya sat beside him, the black glass arrowhead clutched in her palm, her gaze fixed on the rising sun, which offered warmth but no comfort. They arrived back in the city, but the city was an alien landscape. The sounds of traffic, the glare of the billboards, and the casual indifference of the crowds felt cheap and temporary compared to the profound, ancient truth held within the Olympic forest. They had left the wilderness, but the wilderness had never left them. Their trauma manifested in strange ways. Leo, the aspiring filmmaker, could no longer look at a camera without feeling the cold, dead screen of the device that failed him at the clearing. He had intended to capture a monster for fame. He had lost a friend for truth. He finally deleted all the corrupted footage from his memory card, the final physical act of burying the lie he had chased. Maya began to feel the world through the lens of the shifter's influence. Every time she felt doubt about a decision, she heard the phantom echo of the shifter's whispers. Every time she saw waste or disrespect for nature, she felt the low, chilling vibration of the forest's unending pain. Her anxiety had been replaced by a quiet, fierce resolve. Sam had paid for her confusion, and she would honor that price with clarity.